Hey guys, it's Lauren. I'm sitting in my car, as I want to do before work, and I got a DM on Instagram with a question about initiation and validity, and I started typing out this really long-ass response to this person, which is funny because, as you can imagine, I get a lot of DMs on all of my accounts, and the ones from people who clearly haven't read anything or just are flippant, or the ones from weird dudes, those just get deleted. But every now and then I get a sincere question from somebody who's obviously done some reading, and those are the ones where I'm just let me write a 1,000-word essay in response to your question. What do you mean I can't post this many words, Instagram? So anyway, as I was typing out this essay that she didn't actually ask for, I was like, hey, what if I just made a video? Because I'm going through my backlog of videos and I'm getting to the point where I'm like, oh, I've already made a video about this, or I've made a video about that. But then I realized that I made that video 6 years ago, and things have changed, or the community has changed. I'm talking to completely different people now. And maybe it warrants saying some things again. So the question was essentially, can you be Wiccan without being an initiate? And this is a much more complicated question than I think people appreciate. There have been times in my life where I've been really cut and dry, right? One way or the other, okay? I mean, when I was a 90s teen witch, right, it was, well, of course that's not true because Scott Cunningham says, or whatever. And then I went through this period of really intense insecurity in college, and then right after college when I'd read Triumph of the Moon, right, and Gerald Gardner and all this other stuff, and I realized that, oh my God, there's this whole other world out here. And that made me really unsure about my practice as a Wiccan and my experience kind of in the broader pagan community, because suddenly this fear was introduced that I actually wasn't doing it right. And, actually, maybe I wasn't a Wiccan. Okay, and that was really terrifying. I think that sometimes I think that a lot of us on the other side don't appreciate how terrifying that is. Particularly if you've been participating in a community for a long time. I mean, at that point, it had been, I don't know, a decade, right? A decade of open circles and, college coven, whatever. And my bedroom altar, and I had this amazing book of shadows that I made with this multicolored sketchbook, different colored pages, and it was for pastels, so it had this really textured feel to it, and I did all of this really elaborate artwork in pastel, which is a terrible medium in a sketchbook. I was spraying everything down with 4 layers of acrylic spray to make it not gross, and anyway, just to express kind of the dedication that I was putting into what I was doing. Writing really intensely and reading it really intensely, and maybe reading things that, aren't on traditional reading lists, but reading nonetheless what I could get a hold of. And then kind of suddenly being in this space where all of that was thrown into question. That's a really difficult experience. And I think we need to be careful about invalidating all of that, which is something that I think a lot of traditionalists do. When we come out and say, well, if you're not an initiate, you're not Wiccan. The problem with doing that is that we're putting really firm boundaries on what we mean by those terms without really elaborating on them. And I think historically that's just not a thing that we can do, because even when you look amongst traditional communities, there's so much variety. You still have to pin down who has the real thing, right? And I just wish that we could nuance things a little bit more, because personally what I found when I was coming up and kind of teaching myself and doing the teen witch thing, and then really into my mid-20s, so my adulthood, those years were really important, and they taught me a lot. And in many ways, they prepared me for initiation in a way that I wouldn't have been prepared if I'd just sat around waiting for a traditional coven, right? I think that's a thing that people do. Like, they're so disdainful of solitary Wicca that they're like, oh no, I'm not going to read any of this garbage. I'm just going to wait for a traditional coven to appear in my backyard, or, you know, wait to be able to afford to travel to one. You know, I'm not going to read any of this other stuff. I'm not going to set up a bedroom altar because none of that stuff is real Wicca, so I'm just not going to do it. And like, that's dumb. That's just really dumb because those experiences lay the foundation for so many things. I mean, you can still learn magic. You can still appreciate the way that our mythologies kind of interplay with the agricultural year. There's so much that you can do without being an initiate that can prepare you for that moment. And I think people are too caught up in other people thinking that they're dumb and wrong, or else like fucking things up to a degree that they're gonna like ruin their entryway into traditional Wicca when they finally get there. And like, that's just not true. My experiences as a solitary built a foundation, and furthermore, like, frankly, they taught me grit. When you have to assemble something just using text, just using, you know, like assholes on a message board on the internet, and trial and error, and getting out into the community and just kind of taking what you can get and building what you can, and trying to make that strong, really without a lot of help. I think that's how you prove your dedication. I know in Foxfire, I've had a lot more success personally with people who have that experience than people who don't have any. I would rather have people who had kind of the gall to go out and like do the thing anyway, even though like they didn't know what they were doing. That's something that I really respect. So, you know, are those people were they not Wiccan beforehand? Like, what were they doing? I don't know. I think that by itself is kind of its own ordeal prior to initiation. And I think that's one that a lot of initiates are really too quick to dismiss. So initiatory Wicca is a distinct thing, okay? I don't think we should speak about it like it's interchangeable with other kinds of Wicca. I don't think that solitaries, and you know, solitary isn't even the right word, because you can be an initiate and be solitary, but eclectic Wiccans, neo-Wiccans, which is the term that I'm not seeing as much of anymore, which I think is great because it's a terrible term. But we're up to something different. I think that's true. And I think that there's a disservice that happens when we say things like, oh, well, you know, initiation isn't important, or like being eclectic and doing it yourself is the equivalent of being in a coven, and like you don't need the experience. Like, I don't think that's true. But to talk about them like they're completely unrelated, I think is unfair, particularly because so many traditional like initiate leaders were so instrumental in the establishment of solitary eclectic Wicca. I mean, Gardner himself was really intent on there being as many witches as possible, right? He's really invested in the idea of reincarnation and wanting to be born into a witch family, which means that there need to be as many witches as possible. And you can look through these early texts and realize that folks weren't as hung up on distinctions as we are now. It's not to say that they didn't happen. Of course they did, but there were lots of different kinds of witches running around at this time. And the stuff they were fighting about was, you know, oftentimes different than what we're fighting about now. And I think we're doing our history a disservice when we try to cut off this really big part of it. I mean, Valiente advocated for solitary practice outside of a coven. She didn't think you needed to be an initiate. I mean, she left Gardner and went off and did other things after only a few years, right? So, like, I mean, Buckland did the same thing, right? So, I mean, they had lots of personal reasons for doing that too, but I just think that to say solitary eclectics like completely have it wrong and they're really not part of our movement, and like I don't think that that's right. I don't think that's fair. I think that's really short-sighted. And I can still, as a Wiccan initiate, value initiation and think that it's critical without being like blindly dismissive of other kinds of Wicca. What I think leads to trouble, and the thing that does get me miffed, is when people who aren't initiates come out and purport to be experts. When somebody who's never worked in a coven, who doesn't have a traditional initiation, who hasn't worked the degrees, who hasn't participated in these communities, when they come out and they say like definitive things about what Wicca is, that's when I'm like, okay, no, bro, like that's not the case. But most of the time, that's not what we're dealing with. So anyway, all that to say, can you be Wiccan without being an initiate? Yeah, I think so. I don't know that you can be a priest or priestess in our mood. Like, I don't know. Like, there's something different going on for sure. But to say that solitary eclectics are practicing a completely different religion or a completely different tradition, I don't think that's true. And I don't think that they're less worthy of respect. A lot of the times I respect them more just because of the kind of effort that it takes to put together a practice like that, relatively unaided, over the course of many years. I mean, I know a lot of Wiccan initiates who haven't worked very hard at all. I bet you do too. So I just don't think it's fair to make really blanket statements about one community or the other. They're different things, yes, but they're related. The experience of one is not inherently the experience of another. Both warrant respect. Both have a lot to teach. I think people should have both, like ideally. And there are lots of people who have the traditional coven experience and get initiated and they're like, nope, and they go back to being solitaries and doing things their own way. There are a lot of people who do that, maybe even most people. So there's something on that path that's appealing too, right? Like that choice has a lot to offer too. So I don't know, I think people should just stop being so butthurt about things one way or the other. Anyway, it's actually time for me to go into work now, so I'm going to do that. Leave your comments below, and I hope everybody is well.